Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a bit of a Matrix moment.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
You know that scene, right, where Neo finally stops seeing the walls and the furniture, and he just starts seeing the green code cascading down.
Oh yeah, the code that's making up the reality around him?
Exactly. He stops seeing the illusion and starts seeing the software.
I know exactly the one.
Right. So I want to try to do that today, but for the physical world. I want you and everyone listening to just take a look around for a second.
It's a good exercise.
Seriously, if you're at home, look out the window. If you're walking your dog, just, look at the street. If you're driving, maybe keep your eyes on the road, but look at the strip mall you just passed.
What do you see? And more importantly, why do you see it?
Well, normally you see a house or a factory or a skyscraper. And you think, okay, that skyscraper's there because a developer bought the land and decided to build a tall building. Simple enough.
Or that factory is way over on the edge of town because, land was probably cheap out there.
We tend to think the layout of our world is, organic. We think it's the result of the free market or just the natural ways cities grow over time.
It just sort of happened.
Exactly. But as we went through the research for this deep dive, I realized the American city is about as organic as a microchip. It is engineered, it is coded. And that code is what we're talking about today. We are talking about zoning.
And I can hear the collective groan of the audience right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Zoning. It sounds like the absolute tedious peak of local bureaucracy.
It really does. It brings to mind late-night city council meetings, bad coffee, stacks of paper.
And people arguing about the height of a fence.
It sounds incredibly boring. It sounds like the driest topic we could possibly pick.
Yeah.
But here's the headline I want to start with and the reason we were doing this.
Okay.
This boring bureaucracy is arguably the most powerful social engineering tool in American history.
That is not an exaggeration at all. It is the operating system of the built environment.
It determines who your neighbors are. It determines if you can walk to a grocery store or if you have to get in a car and drive.
It determines how much your house is worth, or if you can even afford a house in the first place.
And, as we're going to see, it has determined, quite strictly, how segregated our society remains to this day.
It's the invisible architecture. And to understand it, we have to understand that this system, it didn't just appear out of the ether, it was invented.
It was invented?
It was invented for very specific reasons that have, frankly, nothing to do with fence heights.
So, our mission today is to unpack this beast. We're going to look at how a system that was originally designed just to stop nuisances, like, simply keeping a slaughterhouse away from a kindergarten.
Which everyone agrees is a good idea.
Right. How did that simple idea somehow mutate into this massive tool for wealth creation and exclusion?
It's a fascinating and kind of scary evolution. But before we get into the history, which involves everything from laundromats to mountain lions, weirdly enough,
It gets weird.
we probably need to agree on terms. When you and I say zoning, what are we actually defining?
Yeah, let's get the definitions out of the way so we can get to the drama.
Yeah.
Because for me, zoning just feels like a map with colors on it, red, yellow, blue.
That's the visual representation, for sure. But strictly speaking, zoning is a system of laws that divides a jurisdiction's land into districts, or zones.
Yeah.
And within those zones, the law limits two main things: use and form.
Use and form. Okay, let's break those down. Use seems straightforward enough.
Use is the what. What activity is allowed to happen on this square of dirt? Can you build a house? Can you build a smelting plant? Can you open a Starbucks?
So you can't build a house in a factory zone.
Right. In a strict zoning regime, these are mutually exclusive. You cannot put the Starbucks in the smelting plant zone, and you certainly can't put the smelting plant in the residential zone.
Got it. And form. What's that?
Form is the how. It dictates what the building physically looks like. How tall can it be? How far back from the street does it have to be? That's the setback. How much of the lot can be covered in concrete versus, say, grass? This is often called the bulk regulation.
So use is no factories here, and form is your porch can only be 10 feet from the sidewalk.
Precisely. And the scope of this is just wild. It regulates everything. It's not just big categories.
It gets more specific.
Oh, incredibly granular. Some zoning codes will specify whether you can sell furniture in a specific spot or how many square feet of paved space you can have in your driveway.
Now, here's the part that I got stuck on when I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
I own my house. I pay the mortgage. I pay the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to build a shed in the backyard to sell homemade pickles, or if I want to build a roller coaster for my kids, why does the government have the right to stop me? Isn't that a violation of my property rights?
And you have just hit on the central tension of the last 100 years.
It feels like it should be my land, my rules.
You would think that owning land means you control it, but legally, zoning relies on a concept called police power.
Police power. That sounds intense. It sounds like it involved handcuffs and SWAT teams.
It does sound that way, doesn't it? But in constitutional law, it's much, much broader. Police power doesn't just mean law enforcement officers. It refers to the inherent capacity of the states to regulate behavior and enforce order within their territory.
And what's the justification for that?
The betterment of the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of their inhabitants.
Ah, general welfare. That's the magic phrase.
That is the catch-all. The argument is, your right to build a pickle shed or a roller coaster ends where your neighbor's right to a rat-free, quiet, safe existence begins.
So my rights end at my property line.
Basically. And the state delegates this police power to your local town council. So when the planning board tells you no, they are essentially flexing the same constitutional muscle as a cop arresting a bank robber. They are maintaining order.
That puts a very different spin on the local planning board meeting. They aren't just bureaucrats, they're exercising state power.
Exactly. And to understand how they got that power, we have to wind the clock back. Because this didn't start with some grand plan to make cities beautiful.
No, looking at the history, it seems incredibly reactive. It wasn't some founding father who loved urban planning.
Not at all.
It started in the Wild West, essentially.
California, late 19th century. This is where we see the first real attempts at land use control. And it brings us to the wash house ordinances.
Wash houses. Okay, so for the modern listener, a wash house implies a laundromat with, coin-operated machines.
Yeah.
But in 1880s California, this was an industrial operation.
It absolutely was. You have to imagine large vats of boiling water, steam, chemicals, open fires to heat the iron.
All in wooden buildings, probably?
Often in wooden buildings. They were significant fire hazards, and they were noisy. They were industrial.
So looking at Modesto, California in 1885, they pass an ordinance banning wash houses from certain areas of the city. On paper, you can see why a city might want to do that.
Right.
If I'm living in a wooden house in Modesto in 1885, maybe I don't want a fire-prone industrial laundry next door. That sounds like a legitimate safety concern.
That was the legal argument, health and safety. It always is. But we have to look at the context. Who owned the laundries in California at that time?
It was predominantly, if not almost exclusively, Chinese residents.
Exactly. This was the era of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Anti-Chinese sentiment was the dominant political force in California.
So this wasn't really about fire safety.
Well, the law was about fire safety, but the motivation was something else entirely. Modesto passes this ordinance. Then Los Angeles follows suit between 1904 and 1909. They created specific districts where laundries were illegal.
And the boundaries of those districts just happened to align with where the white residents lived.
You got it. It was a master class in using a neutral law to achieve a discriminatory outcome.
Right. The law didn't say no Chinese people allowed.
No, it said no laundries allowed. But since the laundries were the economic engine of the Chinese community, the result was exclusion.
This seems to be the recurring theme of our research today. The tool is technical. It's about fire safety or noise, but the motive is social.
That's the pattern. And it wasn't just laundries. Los Angeles started using these early laws to separate other nuisances. We're talking about slaughterhouses, tanneries.
Things that smell bad.
Things that smell really bad. And crucially, for LA oil drilling.
I always forget that LA was basically one giant oil field back then.
Massive. It was There Will Be Blood meets the beach. You had oil derricks popping up in people's front yards. They were loud. They smelled like sulfur. And they occasionally, exploded.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here again. If I bought a nice bungalow, I definitely do not want an oil derrick or a slaughterhouse next to my porch.
Of course not.
That seems like a very rational thing for the government to prevent.
It is rational. And that is why zoning survived the courts initially, because at its core, separating a slaughterhouse from a kindergarten is a good idea. No one argues with that. The problem is that once you establish the legal power to separate uses based on nuisance, you can start defining nuisance in very subjective ways.
Right. A slaughterhouse is a nuisance. Is an apartment building a nuisance?
Is a corner store a nuisance? Is a family with a different skin color a nuisance? That's where the slippery slope begins.
So while California was dealing with wash houses and oil wells focusing on use, New York City was dealing with a totally different problem.
A very different problem. They were dealing with form, and specifically, they were dealing with the sun.
The sun, or rather the lack of it. This takes us to 1915, right?
Yes. The catalyst here is a specific building, the Equitable Building at 120 Broadway. It's still there today. You can go see it.
And the problem wasn't that it was too tall, necessarily. It was that it was fat.
It was massive. It went straight up from the property line. It covered the entire lot. It didn't taper at all.
So it was just a giant block.
A giant stone block that blocked the windows of neighboring buildings and cast a shadow that extended for blocks. It literally stole the sunshine from the streets below.
And people were terrified. They looked at this thing and thought, if every building in Manhattan is built like this, New York will become a dark, dank maze. No light, no air, just canyons of stone.
It was a very real, very visceral fear. So in 1916, New York City passed the first citywide zoning resolution. This is really the grandfather of modern zoning in America.
But they didn't ban skyscrapers. I mean, that would have been impossible in New York.
No, that would have killed the real estate market dead. Instead, they mandated setbacks.
Explain setbacks for us, because this fundamentally changed how our cities look.
Imagine a wedding cake.
Okay.
The base is wide. Then, as you go up, the next layer is a bit smaller. It's set back from the edge. Then the next layer is smaller again. The 1916 law said that once a building reached a certain height, a height based on the width of the street it was on, it had to step back.
So the higher you go, the skinnier the building has to get.
Exactly. This allowed light and air to actually reach the sidewalk. It stopped the streets from becoming dark tunnels.
And this literally shaped the skyline of New York City for decades. If you look at the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building, they have that stepped, tapering shape.
That classic Art Deco look.
That's not just an artistic choice. That's the law.
It was the law. And it was popularized by this illustrator, Hugh Ferris. He drew these moody, futuristic, almost Gothic renderings of what the city would look like under these new laws. He made zoning look almost romantic.
Wow.
He turned a bureaucratic rule about angles into a whole architectural style.
So we have California banning uses to separate people and industries. We have New York regulating form to save the sunlight. But how did this go from just a few big cities to the standard operating procedure for the entire United States?
For that, we have to look at the federal government, and specifically a man named Herbert Hoover.
Herbert Hoover. Before he was president, he was the Secretary of Commerce.
And Hoover was an engineer by trade. He was a huge believer in standardization, efficiency, and order. He wanted to increase home ownership in America.
And he saw zoning as a tool for that.
He saw it as a way to protect property values, which he believed would encourage people to buy homes and feel secure in their investment.
So he didn't want every city in America reinventing the wheel, trying to write their own zoning laws from scratch.
Right. His team at the Commerce Department drafted something called the Standard State Zoning Enabling Act, or SZEA. It was published in 1922 and revised in 1924.
It was basically a template.
It was a copy and paste job. The federal government basically said to the states, hey, you want to do zoning? Here is a pre-written law that lets your town set it up. Just pass this.
And they did.
They absolutely did. It swept the country. This is why zoning laws in a small town in Ohio often look legally very similar to zoning laws in a suburb of Seattle.
They're all working off the same 100-year-old template.
The same template provided by Herbert Hoover.
Okay, so the system is in place. But Americans, we don't like being told what to do with our property. If I buy a plot of land and I want to maximize my profit, surely I'm going to fight back against these rules.
Oh, the fight was immediate. And this brings us to the single most important legal case in the history of zoning.
The big one.
Village of Euclid, Ohio v. Ambler Realty Co. from 1926.
This is the Euclidean in Euclidean zoning. I admit, when I first heard that term, I thought it was about geometry, like Euclid the mathematician.
A lot of people do. It's a common mistake. But no, it refers to the Village of Euclid, a suburb of Cleveland. And this case is the reason zoning as we know it exists today.
So set the scene for us. What happened in Euclid?
Ambler Realty Company owned a large tract of land, about 68 acres. It was prime real estate. It sat right between a railroad and a main road.
Perfect for industry.
Perfect. In a free market, this land was destined for factories, warehouses. That's where the money was.
But the Village of Euclid had other ideas.
The village passed a comprehensive zoning ordinance, and they zoned a huge chunk of Ambler's land for residential use only.
So Ambler Realty is sitting there doing the math. If I sell this for factories, it's worth, say, $10,000 an acre. If I just sell it for houses, it's worth maybe $2,500 an acre.
That's right. The government, with the stroke of a pen, just wiped out 75% of their land's value.
So they sued.
They sued, and their argument was powerful. They said this was a taking of property without due process, a violation of the 14th Amendment. They said, you didn't physically take my land, but you took its value. You took my right to use it.
And initially, the lower court agreed with them.
They did. The trial court judge actually called zoning an illegitimate device. He saw right through it. He said it would lead to economic segregation and that you can't just strip value from people to make the town look nice.
But then it went all the way to the Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court, in a landmark decision, reversed the lower court. They sided with the Village of Euclid.
Why? How did they justify that massive loss of value for the property owner?
They went right back to that nuisance argument. Justice Sutherland wrote the opinion. He famously said, a nuisance may be merely a right thing in the wrong place, like a pig in the parlor instead of the barnyard.
That is the famous quote, a pig in the parlor.
And by separating uses, keeping the pigs, which were factories, out of the parlor, which were the residential neighborhoods, the government is protecting the health and safety of the community.
And that protection is more important than the developer's profit.
They ruled that it outweighed the financial loss of the developer, and boom, Euclidean zoning becomes the law of the land.
Separation of uses. Houses here, shops there, factories way over there. The government officially has the right to decide.
But there's another really important case we have to mention, which actually happened before Euclid, that sets up the racial dynamic perfectly.
Okay.
Buchanan v. Worley in 1917.
This one is fascinating because on the surface, it seems like a win for civil rights, but when you dig into the reasoning, it's purely capitalistic.
It is. So in 1910, the city of Baltimore tried to pass a zoning law that was explicitly racial. It designated blocks as either black or white.
Wow. They weren't even hiding it. No laundry's excuse. Just this block is for black people, this block is for white people.
No subtlety at all. And other cities followed, Atlanta, Louisville, St. Louis. But in 1917, the Supreme Court struck this down in Buchanan v. Worley.
So they said, you can't segregate by race. That sounds good.
It does sound good. But, and this is the absolute key, they didn't strike it down because they believed in racial equality or integration. They struck it down because it violated the right to contract.
So it wasn't, it's wrong to discriminate. It was, it's wrong to tell a white property owner they can't sell to a black buyer if they want to.
Exactly. It was a property rights ruling, not a civil rights ruling. They said the government cannot interfere with the sale and alienation of property based on the color of the buyer's skin.
So explicit racial zoning is dead in 1917. But we know cities didn't just give up and integrate.
Not even close. They just got smarter. They found the loophole.
What was the loophole?
Since they couldn't zone by race, they started zoning by type of housing. They created single-family residential zones.
Which effectively did the same thing.
Right. If you ban apartments, you are, in effect, banning the people who live in apartments, and historically who lived in apartments.
Lower income workers.
Yeah.
Immigrants. Minorities.
Exactly. So you get segregation by class, which functions as a very effective proxy for segregation by race, all while appearing race-neutral on paper.
The law just says single-family detached homes on 1-acre lots. It doesn't mention race.
We aren't banning black families. We are just banning buildings that aren't single-family mansions. It was devious.
And incredibly effective.
It basically created the American suburbs as we know them today.
Now, whenever I talk about zoning, someone always brings up the outlier. The one city that zigs while everyone else sags.
Yes. Houston, Texas.
The no zoning city. I hear this all the time from my libertarian friends. Look at Houston. They have no zoning and it works fine.
Or from critics who say Houston has no zoning and it's a chaotic, ugly mess.
Right. So what's the reality?
Well, let's burst the myth a little bit. Houston doesn't have traditional use zoning. It's true. Voters there rejected it 3 separate times in 1948, 1962, and 1993. They are very proud of that fact.
But I sense a but coming.
But if you drive around Houston, does it look like a chaotic jumble of factories next to nurseries? No.
No, it doesn't.
It looks like every other Sunbelt city. It looks like Atlanta. It looks like Phoenix. It's sprawling and car-dependent.
So why is that? If there's no zoning, why isn't there a steel mill next to the elementary school?
2 big reasons. First, they have deed restrictions.
These are private rules, not government rules.
Yes, private covenants. When a developer builds a subdivision in Houston, they write strict rules into the deeds of the houses.
Like what?
You can only use this for a single-family home. You can't run a business here. You must cut your grass every week.
And the city enforces these private rules.
The city attorney's office handles the enforcement. So instead of the government saying this is a residential zone, the private developer says this is a residential neighborhood, and the city backs them up.
So the outcome is identical.
The outcome is functionally identical. And the second reason,
What's that?
development regulations. Houston still has rules about setbacks. And crucially, they have strict, and I mean strict, parking requirements.
The parking requirements, the hidden killer.
They are the hidden killer of density. If you legally force every business to have a massive parking lot, say 10 spots for every 1,000 square feet of retail space,
You physically cannot build a walkable neighborhood.
you can't. It's impossible. If 60% of your city's land has to be asphalt for cars, you force everything to be spread out.
So the no zoning city is actually just a privatized zoning city with really aggressive parking mandates.
Precisely. It's a distinction without a difference, really. It's a failed control group in the great American experiment.
Okay, let's talk about the bill. The cost. Because this isn't just about aesthetics or history. This hits our wallets every single month. We're in a housing affordability crisis in this country.
A severe one.
The rent is too damn high. How much of that is zoning's fault?
A significant amount. I mean, it comes down to basic supply and demand. And zoning, by its very nature, artificially limits supply.
Give me an example of how that works mechanically.
Okay, let's talk about minimum lot sizes. This is a very common zoning tool. A town might say, you can only build a house here if the lot is at least 1 acre.
1 acre. That's huge. In a dense city, you could fit 10, 15 townhouses on an acre.
You could fit an apartment building with 50 units.
Right.
So instead of 50 homes for 50 families, the law says you can only have 1 home for 1 wealthy family. You have just drastically, legally reduced the supply of housing on that piece of land.
And when supply is low and demand is high,
Prices skyrocket.
Well-
Economists have a concept for this. They call it the zoning tax.
this isn't a check you write to the government, right?
No, it's not a literal tax. It's the difference between the actual cost of construction, the materials, the labor, the raw land, and the final price of the house. It's the artificial inflation of the value due to regulatory scarcity.
It's the premium you pay just for the permission to exist.
That's a great way to put it.
I saw some numbers on this in our notes, and they were staggering. In San Francisco, that zoning tax is estimated at over $400,000 per home.
Let that sink in. $400,000 of the price tag isn't the bricks, the wood, or the labor. It's not the profit the developer made. It is just air. It's the cost of permission to exist in a restricted market.
And it's not just San Francisco.
No. In Seattle, New York City, and LA, it's around $200,000. Chicago and DC, around $80,000.
That effectively prices out an entire generation of people. I mean, $200,000 is the down payment. It's the whole mortgage in other parts of the country.
It does, and it hurts the economy as a whole. There was a fascinating study in 2017 that suggested if just 3 metro areas, New York, San Francisco, and San Jose, deregulated their zoning to the level of the median U.S. city, U.S. GDP could rise by almost 9%.
9%.
Other studies have put it as high as 12%.
That's trillions of dollars. How?
Because right now, zoning prevents labor mobility. It prevents people from moving to where the most productive jobs are. If a talented software engineer can't afford to live in Silicon Valley, they don't move there. They take a lower productivity job somewhere else. We are leaving massive economic growth on the table because we refuse to build apartments.
And speaking of Silicon Valley, let's talk about Los Altos Hills.
The ultimate example. Los Altos Hills is a town in Silicon Valley. The entire town, and I mean essentially the whole thing, is zoned residential with a 1 acre minimum lot size.
And only one primary dwelling is allowed on each of those 1 acre lots.
Correct. The courts upheld this back in the 1970s.
So effectively, this town has legally banned anyone who cannot afford an acre of land in one of the most expensive real estate markets on planet Earth.
It is a velvet rope around the entire city.
It's a gated community disguised as a municipality.
It is, and this leads us directly into the social engineering aspect, because when you ask these towns why they do this, usually they give you some excuse about traffic or school overcrowding, but sometimes they tell you the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, I saw this quote from Barrington Hills, Illinois. It's incredible.
This was a few years back. They have a 5 acre minimum lot size.
At Bakers.
5 acres. And officials there actually told the Chicago Tribune that this helped keep out the riffraff.
Keep out the riffraff. I mean, at least they're honest.
It's stark. But it's not just about lot size. It gets even more personal. It's about the very definition of family.
This brings us to a Supreme Court case I'd never even heard of. Village of Belterre v. Boras.
This is a crucial one, especially for college towns. The Village of Belterre, New York, had a zoning ordinance that defined a family very strictly. It said a family is people related by blood, adoption, or marriage.
So a traditional nuclear family, essentially.
Right, and then it restricted the number of unrelated people who could live together in one house to just two.
Two. So a group of 6 college students renting a large house to save money.
Illegal.
6 elderly women, like the Golden Girls, trying to live together for companionship and to save money.
Also illegal.
Did the Supreme Court really uphold that?
They did. In 1974, they said the government has a legitimate interest in protecting traditional family values and keeping neighborhoods quiet. They said boarding houses and fraternity houses bring noise and traffic.
But it effectively targets the poor and the young. If I can't afford a house on my own, my only option is to have roommates. And this town is telling me that having roommates is a crime.
It creates a huge barrier to entry. And this is where the politics get very, very messy. We tend to think of regulation as a liberal thing and deregulation as a conservative thing. But in zoning, those lines are completely blurred.
Right. The data I saw shows that support for banning apartments, multifamily housing, is concentrated among affluent homeowners.
And there is no substantial difference between liberal and conservative homeowners on this issue.
None.
When it comes to their own backyard, ideology goes right out the window. Everyone becomes a NIMBY. Not in my backyard.
So a liberal homeowner might have a Black Lives Matter sign on the lawn.
But then they'll go to a city council meeting and fight tooth and nail against a new duplex that would allow Black families to actually live in that neighborhood.
It's the classic, I love humanity, I just don't want them parking in front of my driveway.
That's it, exactly. And we have to talk about the environmental cost, too. The irony here is just so thick.
Right. Zoning was originally about health, fresh air, separation from industrial smoke.
But by enforcing low density, by making everything spread out so far, zoning forces car culture.
You have to drive everywhere.
You have to. You can't walk to the grocery store if the zoning code says the grocery store has to be 3 miles away across a 6-lane highway.
So we are all driving more, longer commutes, more emissions.
Exactly. We're pushing development out to the fringes, to the exurbs, where carbon emissions per capita are much higher. And we are creating sedentary lifestyles because walking isn't a viable form of transportation for most Americans.
So the tool designed to protect public health is now contributing to obesity and climate change.
A tragic irony.
Now, sometimes this NIMBYism, this desire to stop development, gets weird. I mean, really weird.
Chuckles. You want to talk about the mountain lions?
I want to talk about the mountain lions.
The Woodside incident. This is a classic. It just happened in 2022.
Okay, so Woodside, California, very wealthy town in Silicon Valley. The state of California passed a law, SB 9, saying towns had to allow more housing. Woodside didn't want to do it. So what was their brilliant plan?
Their plan was to declare the entire town a mountain lion habitat.
The whole town. The manicured lawns, the swimming pools, the tennis courts.
All of it. The whole town. Their argument was that because mountain lions might potentially walk through, they couldn't possibly build any duplexes. They were trying to use an environmental loophole to get out of building affordable housing.
That is bold. Did it work?
No, not for a second. The California Attorney General, Rob Bonta, shut it down immediately. He basically sent them a letter saying, a developed suburb is not a protected habitat. Stop acting in bad faith.
Acting good faith.
Yeah.
That seems to be the struggle here. Towns are using every trick in the book.
They are. And it's not just animals, it's signs. Lawn signs are actually a huge zoning battleground.
Really? First Amendment issues.
Huge First Amendment issues. Zoning regulates signage to prevent what they call visual clutter. But the courts have consistently ruled you can't regulate the content of the sign.
So you could say no signs bigger than 3 feet by 3 feet, but you can't say no political signs.
Exactly. Or no for sale signs. This was a big issue in the 70s. Some towns tried to ban for sale signs.
Why would they do that?
They claimed they wanted to prevent panic selling or block busting when minority families started moving into a neighborhood. But the courts struck that down. They said, you can't ban communication just because you don't like the message it might send.
And then there's religion?
RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. This is a federal law that protects religious institutions from discrimination in zoning.
Because churches are often in residential areas, and neighbors often complain about the traffic or the noise.
Or, more controversially, about the social services they provide. There was this heartbreaking case in Gloversville, New York. A Free Methodist church wanted to open a shelter
Or the homeless?
for the homeless. They wanted to provide 40 beds. It was -4 degrees outside.
And zoning stopped them.
The zoning board said a shelter wasn't a permitted use in that zone. They effectively blocked the church from saving lives in freezing weather because it violated the code.
That is where the rubber meets the road. We're arguing about codes and maps and neighborhood character, and people are literally freezing to death on the street.
It highlights the central tension between protecting the stability of a neighborhood and meeting basic human needs. The system, as designed, prioritizes the former.
But, and here's the hopeful part of the deep dive, maybe things are changing.
Right.
We are seeing a shift in the 21st century that I don't think anyone predicted 20 years ago.
The pendulum is definitely swinging back. For 100 years, local towns had total control. The state said, here, you take the power. Now, states are realizing the towns have, in many cases, abused that power, so they're taking it back.
Let's talk about the pioneers. Minneapolis, what did they do?
Minneapolis, 2018. They became the first major U.S. city to end exclusionary single-family zoning.
Just ended it.
Well, they didn't ban single-family homes. They just said, you can only build single-family homes. They legalized triplexes, essentially citywide. They also completely abolished off-street parking minimums.
That is radical. That is undoing 100 years of Euclidean thinking.
It was a massive deal. And then Oregon followed. A state law, House Bill 2001 in 2019.
What did that do?
It said if you are a city with more than 10,000 people, you have to allow duplexes everywhere. If you have more than 25,000 people, you have to allow triplexes and fourplexes.
So the state of Oregon looked at the local towns and said, you aren't building enough housing, so we are overriding your local rules.
That's exactly it. You lost your privileges. California did the same with SB 9 in 2021, allowing up to 4 units on what used to be single-family lots.
And over on the East Coast, my home state, Massachusetts.
The MBTA Communities Law. This is fascinating policy. It requires towns near public transit, near the T, or the commuter rail 2 zone for multifamily housing as of right.
The logic being, we, the taxpayers of the whole state, built this expensive train station.
Yeah.
You, the local wealthy town, shouldn't be allowed to block people from living near it.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But it's a huge fight. The town of Milton voted not to comply in early 2024. They just defied the state law.
So what happens now?
Now the Attorney General is suing them. This is the active battlefront of American domestic policy right now. It's happening in real time.
And the politics are so fascinating because it's bipartisan. You have this weird, strange bedfellows coalition.
The YIMBY coalition.
Yes.
In my backyard.
You have Republican governors like Charlie Baker and Mitt Romney in Massachusetts, or governors in red states like Montana pushing for this. Why?
Because they believe in market freedom. They believe in property rights. If I own the land, let me build on it. Deregulation is a conservative value.
And at the same time, you have progressive Democrats pushing for it.
For completely different reasons. They're focused on affordability, social equity, and climate change. Density reduces carbon footprints and allows for more economic and racial integration.
So the libertarians and the democratic socialists are high-fiving each other over duplexes.
It's one of the few places in American politics where the horseshoe theory is actually working.
So let's wrap this up. We've covered wash houses, wedding cakes, the Supreme Court, and mountain lions. What is the big takeaway here?
I think if we look at the big picture, zoning started as a reasonable attempt to fix the chaos of the Industrial Revolution. It was about health, light, and safety. It was about stopping factories from poisoning neighborhoods.
A pig in the parlor.
Right. It was about keeping the pig out of the parlor, but it mutated.
It did.
It mutated. It became a mechanism for wealth protection that accidentally, or in many cases, purposefully broke the housing market and segregated the country. It prioritized the property values of the haves over the basic needs of the have-nots.
And now, for the first time in a century, we're actively trying to undo that Euclidean knot. We're trying to blend uses back together.
We're trying to return to the way we built cities for thousands of years before 1916. Organic, mixed, walkable, a place where the grocery store is next to the barbershop and the barbershop has an apartment on top of it.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. You mentioned this to me before we started recording, and it really stuck with me.
It's a question of values, really. I want you to imagine your own neighborhood, right where you live, and imagine the zoning laws changed tomorrow to allow a small grocery store on the corner or a duplex next door to you.
Would you see that as the destruction of your investment? Would you be angry about the potential for more traffic and, noise?
Or would you see it as the creation of a real community, a place where you could walk to get a gallon of milk, a place where your kid's teacher could afford to live? Because ultimately, a city isn't just a collection of property values.
It's a collection of people. Something to think about next time you look out that window. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.